everybody, this is the Wikstrand. So, the anticipation for X-Men 3 was very, very high. Everybody loved X-Men 2, thought it was one of the best movies they had ever seen. I remember watching that one in the cinema. Time for a cinema memory. So, I was sitting there with a friend of mine who was really into comic book movies and especially X-Men. And he went absolutely nuts. On the last few seconds of that movie. I said, what is it? Dark Phoenix, they're doing the Dark Phoenix saga, he said. And eyes bulging like it was Nicolas Cage or something like that. And I was like, what's that? Oh, you'll see, he said. You'll see. And I was anticipating this movie a lot because I thought it was going to be maybe one of the best movies of 2006, aka one of the greatest movie years of all time. But then stuff came out that, dampened my enthusiasm for this one a little bit. When I found out that we were not going to have Bryan Singer in the director's chair, I was like, Brett Ratner, it will work. Speaking of Brett Ratner, he gets a pretty raw deal these days. People really seem to dislike his work. I think he's a totally fine director. He did a very good Red Dragon movie. He did a couple of decent Jackie Chan action comedies and stuff like that, so it was totally fine. I were more concerned for the runtime. 101 or what is it, 102 minutes? I thought, damn, that's like the first X-Men movie was 101, 102 minutes. I thought that movie was too short. I liked the almost 2.5 hour runtime for X-Men 2 because they needed that for the story, I thought. I fear that with this short runtime, they were going to risk ramming too much story into one movie. Oh boy, was I right about that. So let's talk about the movie I actually think is pretty damn decent. It's not as good as X-Men or X-Men 2, but there are actually a lot of X-Men movies that I think that it is better than. There are 2 Wolverine movies that I think it is superior to. I think it is better than the New Mutants, and the remake essentially of this Dark Phoenix I think is inferior to this one. Let's find out how good it is, shall we? This is X-Men 3, The Last Stand. Out that Jean Grey actually survived X-Men 2. She did not die in Alkali Lake, and they find her, but she's changed and she turns evil and becomes Dark Phoenix, essentially some kind of unhinged raw energy that Charles Xavier always feared that she would be, and has sort of tried to suppress it over all of these years. And now she's going on a rampage. So the mutants are gonna have to stop them. But at the same time as that is happening, we also have the Cure storyline, because we have this professor whose son turned into a mutant. He becomes Angel. I liked Angel, by the way. He looks kind of awesome. And he wants to find a cure for the mutant gene. Not because he hates mutants per se, but more that he sees the mutant gene as a sort of genetic defect that can be cured, and people really doesn't want to be, freaks of nature. He has found a young mutant boy whose superpower is essentially to remove the powers of anybody who comes in direct close contact to him. So they are developing a cure or a serum that can remove this. So the dilemma for our X-Men is, of course, are they going to take the cure and become normal, or are they, remaining mutants because it is a part of their identity? I thought that was an interesting and kind of fascinating story which they could have told. I didn't think that the Jean Grey Dark Phoenix storyline was that interesting, and Wolverine's dilemma of A, loving Jean Grey, but B, also knowing that how dangerous she is and that she's basically a walking Armageddon. They are cramming 2, on paper, very interesting storylines into a 102-minute movie. That is going to be very, very, very difficult to do, and this movie is very rushed. I think that is the biggest problem this movie has. The tone of this movie and the atmosphere of this movie is basically the same as the 2 first. X-Men movies, in my opinion. I'm probably wrong about that, but it's a hill I'm willing to die on. I felt right at home. It felt like the same movie. Maybe it's mostly because that, you know, the cast was all there and the style was basically the same. You could feel some goofy nonsense that were creeping around here that may or may not be attributed to Brett Ratner's directorial style or whatever, but it didn't bother me that much. The movie had big action sequences and had a big epic scope to the whole thing, but it didn't feel important, it didn't feel as big as, let's say, X-Men 2. And when the X-Men are trying to fix these Dark Phoenix problems, they suffer a heavy loss. A character dies. Now, as Toad says in the first movie, "Don't you people ever die?" He's actually revived at the end of the movie after, you know, the end credits. It's like, why doesn't anything matters in these movies, I thought, when I actually saw it. I actually found out that that happened years after this movie was released. I didn't know about the, you know, post-credit sequences or something like that at the time of me watching this movie the first time. Magneto is, of course, very, very opposite to, you know, there being a cure and stuff like that, proud mutant as he is, and declaring that we are the cure when he has the, you know, his big rally in the forest. I would have given this movie 100 points if at that point the band The Cure would, you know, step up, you know, with their instrument that says, "No, actually, we are the cure." If they would have done that, I would have howled with laughter. But beside that, this movie has everything you want, basically, from a X-Men movie. It has some, you know, cool sequences where the mutants uses their powers, and we have big fight sequences, and Wolverine is doing cool stuff. The Juggernaut shows up and doing cool stuff, even though people apparently hate the phrase, "I'm the Juggernaut, bitch!" And he's running through walls, stuff like that. I don't know why that is something that people hate. It was a silly line, but what are you gonna do? We have a stellar cast, great effects, and the movie is very spectacular, especially when Magneto is using the entirety of the Golden Gate Bridge to break into Alcatraz. There are a lot of, you know, things you can poke hole in. Why didn't they do that? Why didn't they do this? And why didn't they do that? But I met the filmmakers halfway and was entertained by the whole thing. There were actually a couple of sequences where they slowed the pace down a little bit. The sequence with the ice skating, I thought, was actually a great sequence and actually had some great character motivations to it. Oh, by the way, Beast shows up and he's played by Kelsey Grammer and he's fucking awesome. So why do people hate this movie so much? I have watched this movie, how many times? Maybe 5, 6 times, always trying to find, you know, the sequence that people hate and trying to find things that people loathe and stuff like that. Yes, it wasn't as good as X-Men or X-Men 2. But when I rewatched those movies, I've come to the conclusion that X-Men is really just a setup for X-Men 2, and X-Men 2 isn't as good as I remembered it to be. I don't know if that has anything to do with the fact that they made such a fantastic bunch of X-Men movies after this. First Class, Days of Futures Past, Apocalypse. I thought those 3 are fucking amazing, and crowning them with Logan, one of the greatest comic book movies of all time. Because it's not like 2022 that people dogpiling on this movie. They were dogpiling on this movie when it was released, and I never understood why. Everything isn't as good. Not all the characters are as good or as, you know, well rounded off as they were in previous incarnations of the X-Men movies, but they were good enough. And I thought that, you know, Mystique springing, you know, Magneto free from the prison was fantastic. The fight in the forest was great. The, you know, final fight on Alcatraz was actually great, and they had some great character moments, and was big and spectacular. So I was very entertained by this movie. It wasn't as good as X-Men movies would be after this or before this, but I still think this is an entertaining comic book movie, far better than its reputation suggests. I don't say that this movie is a must-watch movie, but I think that it is good enough and entertaining enough for me to think that, well, it did its job, and I think it is much better than people give it credit for. With a cast like Patrick Stewart and Hugh Jackman and Halle Berry and Famke Jensen and Ian McKellen and Kelsey Grammer, James Marsden and Ben Foster. This star-studded cast helps this movie quite a lot. And even though they don't have the time to really tell these two stories in a way that they deserve, I think they do the best with the situation that has been given to them. I give X-Men 3 The Last Stand 64 points. I think this movie is a good movie. It's a really good movie even. I even think this movie could have been a great movie. It just lacks something to catapult it to a greater height. So which one is your favorite X-Men movie of all time? Comment below and I'll see you next time from, well, so-and-so reviewing, well, such and such. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.